Welcome back to Another World Audiobooks. I hope you guys' week is going well. I'm not sure if anybody actually watched the video that I did last week of the nice cozy fireplace during the audiobook narration for last week's chapter, but I figured I'd try it again. If you don't care for fires, maybe like something more on the cold spectrum, so we're going to do a nice beautiful snowfall here today. So during the chapter, if you want to watch the video, I'm going to put a nice snowfall on there. I keep trying to figure out ways, because I don't know, people seem to like videos, so if you want more video type stuff, I am definitely willing to give that a shot. I'm trying to figure out a good way to record myself and be able to clip things, because I do a lot of takes on things, so I need to be able to clip the raw version of a chapter. I don't think would be much fun to listen to, so I have to figure out a way to edit the video along with the audio at the same time, which I haven't quite figured out how to do. So if anybody has any suggestions on that point, I'd love to hear from you. Get in touch, anotherworldaudiobooks@gmail.com. Thanks guys again for listening and for sharing the show. Thanks to our patrons who make the show possible. If you want to sign up to be a patron, there's some awesome perks, including getting episodes early. If you are a patron, you're listening to this way earlier than the normal folks, so make sure that you go check that out. If you aren't a patron yet, support the show. anotherworldaudiobooks.com is the best place to go and check that out. So thanks guys for your listening and for support, and without further ado, let's jump into the next chapter of Meet the Tiger. Chapter 11. Carn listens in. Detective Inspector Carn of Scotland Yard, temporary medico, was not far from being typical of the modern CID man. The difference, in fact, being little more than an extra gram or two of brain, which lifted him a finger's breadth above the common competent herd, and which had led to his being detailed for the special work of tracking the tiger. In other words, Carn was not obtrusively brilliant. He knew his job from A to Z, plus one or two other letters. He was a plodder, but an efficient plodder, having been taught in a school which prefers perseverance to genius, and which trains men to rely on methodical, painstaking investigation rather than on flashes of inspiration. Carn would never send an adoring gallery into rhapsodies with some dazzling feat of Homesian deduction. He never whirled through a case in a kind of triumphant procession, with bouquets and confetti flying through the air, streamers blazing, and a brass band urging the awe-stricken populace to see the conquering hero come. But his superiors, a hard-headed and unromantic crowd, knew that he had a record of generally getting there, even if his progress and arrival were monotonous and unspectacular. This brief biographical note is made for the disillusionment of anyone who had imagined that Carn was a genial cipher in the affair of the tiger. He was not, but his tactics were different than those of the saint, who had a weakness for the limelight and no reason to deny himself the gratification of his vanity. The saint was one man, nearly as far outside the law as the tiger, and therefore the tiger would not hesitate to accept a challenge. But Carn represented authority, a vast and inexorable machinery backed up by arms and men, and if Carn showed up in his true colors, they were the colors of authority, and before that the tiger would hesitate for a long time. Carn had no chance of accomplishing his mission unless he worked underground and in the dark, and that, in a way, was a handicap, though it suited his temperament. But Carn, the stolid manhunter, took one look at the handicap, shrugged, and went on with the job, in his own laborious fashion. The arrival of Mr. Templar, heralded by the saint himself with the moral equivalent of a fanfare of terrific trumpets, illuminated with Klieg arcs and fully equipped with one-man orchestra, noises off, self-starter, alarms, excursions, and all modern conveniences, lacking nothing but the cameraman and press agent, had eclipsed Carn's modest efficiency, and perhaps had even put him off his plodding stroke for a while. But it would have taken more than a legion of saints to derange out Mr. Carn permanently. Carn was slow, and Simon was sensational. But in the end they cancelled out, for Carn had had a start of several months. He knew from certain happenings one evening that Templar was hot on the tiger's heels. He was not unduly perturbed, for he could have said the same for himself. In his quiet way, he had already given some attention to Sir John Biddle, and he knew quite a lot about that unpopular man and his strongly fortified house with its garrison of toughs. He had also put some work into Bloom, among others, but Bloom was the more slippery customer, and Carn had made very little headway, so that the boar's sudden prominence in the field came as a surprise. Carn, recuperating from the shock with his well-tried resilience, had nevertheless not yet had time to follow up the clue which the saint had provided. Carn had also an eye to the possibilities of Agatha Girton. He knew of her strange and secretive association with Biddle, but so far he had been unable to account for it better than by assuming her to be in with the gang. Though in what capacity, and with what rank, he hadn't an inkling. There was Algy, for another, and Inspector Carn was prepared to believe startling things of Algy. The other three, Shaw, Smith, and Lapping, Carn had decided to rule out. Lapping in particular, with the policeman's ingrained reverence for the law and its higher officers, he barred completely. In fact, except the saint, Sir Michael Lapping was the only man in Bakem who knew Carn's true designation and sole interest in life. Lapping was a justice of the peace, and Carn, hopeful of success, realized that the ex-judge was an indispensable ally, for Carn carried a warrant ready for Lapping's signature as soon as the name of the tiger could be filled in with reasonable certainty. Taking things all round, therefore, Carn reckoned that he was as well posted as the saint, and in this he was very nearly right. It was Carn's misfortune that he had never been privileged to make the acquaintance of Fernando, and that because of this loss he had been unaware of the significance of the old house. Carn had a hobby which he had only adopted since his arrival in Bakem. He was as enthusiastic about it as he was about butterflies and beetles, but he reserved his pleasure for the hours when he was alone. The nearest telephone was at Ilfracombe, and by Carn's orders all letters addressed to Bakem were opened at the post office there, copied, tested for invisible ink, and forwarded to their destinations after he had been informed of the results of this prying. It was because of divers hints which he had picked up by this means that Carn became so passionately devoted to wireless. It was on the day following the apotheosis of Bloom, when the remains of his lunch had been cleared away, that Carn's hobby justified its adoption. As soon as he found himself alone, the detective went over and unlocked his small roll-top writing desk. When this was opened, it revealed an ebonite panel arrayed with a complicated system of knobs, coils, and valves, which have now ceased to be regarded as mysteries sealed from all but the scientist. The aerial Carn had fixed for himself among the rafters in the roof, and all the essential wiring was cunningly concealed. There was need of this secrecy, for Carn, who had never served an apprenticeship to a cook while walking his beat, was forced to employ a woman from the village to look after his digestion. Village women talk, and the merest whisper that there was another radio fan in Bakem coming to the ears of the tiger would have deprived Carn of one of his most promising lines of investigation. The detective put on the headphones, plugged in, and began his systematic combing of the ether. It was not easy for Carn to use his weapon even when he was convinced of its utility. He never knew at what time the tiger might have arranged to communicate with his agent, though he did know the discouraging fact that the tiger always called on a different wavelength. Twice, Carn had struck the tail end of a conversation and had noted the dialing of his instrument, but the most patient listening had failed to pick up a second message. Then, feeling round again, Carn had caught the same signal in a totally different range. Probably the wavelength changed according to a prearranged timetable. This, however, was Carn's lucky day. The tiger was using a very long wave, and Carn had reversed his usual routine and started at the top to work down the scale. He had not been probing the atmosphere for 5 minutes before he tuned in on a peculiar high-pitched, tremulous whine, which he recognized immediately as the note sent out by the tiger's apparatus in the gaps when no speech was coming over. And he had hardly brought the last condenser round to the exact reaction so that the familiar note was singing in his ears at full strength when a voice cut clean across the humming. "Don't start to come in before it's quite dark." Carn stiffened. He had some idea of what was referred to. The voice continued. "Be very careful. See that there isn't a light showing anywhere, and slow up to half speed when you're 2 miles out. Change over to the electric motors at that point. Templar stays awake at night, and his hearing's exceptionally good." Then another voice asked, "Can you arrange to guide us in?" "I'll post a man on the old house, seaward side, with a green lantern." "Is there likely to be trouble?" "I can't say yet. I'm hoping to get rid of Templar this evening, but he was born lucky, and he might manage to escape again. Be on the safe side. I've just heard that the home girl and he have fixed it up. It's just possible that might make him back out, squeak to the Dicks, and leave the rest to them. I think it's too late for that to matter, but you'd better be prepared for anything. I shall. Good. Did you get the full crew? 2 oilers didn't turn up. I heard just before midnight they were stewed to the gills downtown. I took a chance and left them. You said I was to sail punctually. Quite right, but that leaves you with only 11, counting yourself, doesn't it? That's so, Chief, but we can manage easy. You'll have to. Now listen, I want you to send the first boat round to the quay. You'll miss the fishermen. They'll have gone out on the tide at 10. Biddle and Bloom will be with me, and Templar might be too. That depends on what happens, and what I decide to do with him. His servant will go over the cliff just about the time you're picking us up, and I might have to bring the girl along as well. I'm still wondering whether Templar put her next this joke. In any case, she's very easy on the eyes. I'll get a report shortly, and then I'll be able to think better what to do. This is a new one in you, Chief, dragging a skirt in. You always swore you wouldn't have it. The voice of the tiger snapped back incisively. That's my business, Mags. When I want your opinions, I'll ask for them. All you've got to do is have the cabins ready and send that boat to the quay. Get off all the other boats you can man to the old house. You can get 3 away and still keep a guard, and keep the engineer below. If we do get raided, the boat crews must shift for themselves. Your men haven't got to do anything but row, and if any man catches a crab or talks in the boat, I'll flay him alive. Tell him that from me. I'll have men on the island to help 'em load, and there's a small derrick there, the one we use for hauling the stuff up first, just waiting to be rigged. You ought to be able to get away by 4, if you work. Stand on me, Chief. See that I don't have to tread on you. Have you got that all in your head? Down to the amen, Chief. Call me at 7, in case there are any alterations to be made in those orders. Goodbye. The Tiger's transmission shut down with an audible click, and Carn removed the headphones and leaned back in his chair, gazing thoughtfully at the instrument which had enabled him to listen in on that enlightening chat. Enlightening it certainly was, and no error. Almost the only thing it neglected to reveal to the detective was the identity of the Tiger himself. The voice of the man called Chief had been studiously throttled down to a toneless flat key that was useless as a clue. The Tiger was taking no chances of being caught in person, and he had spoken throughout in a dead-level monotone that anyone could have imitated. And, in addition, Carn knew the tricks which electricity plays even with a man's natural voice, and he would have looked long and carefully before leaping to accuse anybody of being the Tiger on no other grounds than a fancied vocal resemblance after the valves and magnets and transformers had finished distorting a disguised intonation. The one thing that puzzled Carn was the reference to the old house, which apparently was an island. He got up and went over to where, on the wall, was pinned a large-scale ordnance map of the district. It was covered with patterns in various coloured inks, for ostensibly it was a record of Dr. Carn's geological investigations, but in reality it was a diagram of the battlefield for the assistance of Inspector Carn's criminal investigation. A search of the coastline located the old house, which Carn had noticed on his bug-hunting expeditions without imagining that such a small hunk of land was dignified with a name all to itself, for he had been born and bred a long way from the sea. That, then, was the old house, from which something was to be taken on board at dead of night. Carn did not have to wonder what that something might be. Everything had come into his hands in a few short minutes. The detective pulled up a chair and began to pack his pipe, and for all his practical cold-bloodedness, he found that his fingers moved clumsily for the trembling of his hand. His agitation was pardonable, since the trailing of the Tiger was the biggest and stiffest undertaking he had yet brought to a triumphant conclusion. And regard it as a triumphant conclusion he did already, for with dexterous handling he could not conceive the triumph slipping through his fingers. All he had to do was make his plans for the coup. He knew now where the gold was, and it was as safe there as if it had been lying in the vaults of the Confederate Bank. Even if the Saint also knew its whereabouts, Carn could not imagine even that supremely resourceful man being able to remove it single-handed by morning, especially with several tiger cubs on the spot. And the tiger had kindly informed Inspector Carn exactly where he could be found that night. There would be a number of men down at the quay, and the tiger would be one of them. Ruling out Bloom, Biddle, and the Saint, it did not seem as if anyone could go far wrong in making a selection. And possibly the Saint was to be discreetly removed. Carn had to think of that, and it annoyed him. His first duty was to warn Templar and make some arrangements for having him looked after. That was indisputable. The Saint was no ally of his, but neither was he an enemy, not, so far, a criminal, and as a human life he had to be considered. But the time was so short. As has been explained, Bakeham was as effectively shut off from the rest of England as if it had been lifted out of Devonshire and planted on the other side of the Channel. Worse even than that, for there was neither telephone nor telegraph office in the village. To get a hold of the men he required for that night's work, Carn would have to go into Ilfracombe, and the dilapidated Ford of prehistoric vintage, which the local publican hired out to the villagers whose business took them into town, would take an unconscionable time over the journey, and would probably get up on its back axle and shriek boastfully if it went all the way without breaking down. Biddle had a Rolls, which the Saint might have had the immortal Rhine to borrow, with or without permission, in similar circumstances, but which Carn had to consider enviously and leave it at that. The only other car in the neighbourhood was Mr. Lomas Coper's Morris. Carn reviewed that possibility and reluctantly ruled it out. For what Algy knew, Bloom might be expected to find out. And once in Ilfracombe, men would have to be raised and brought to Bakeham. Even after nightfall, the number of officers Carn could assemble for the raid was strictly limited, for the tiger must not be alarmed at all costs. And that was a difficult thing to ensure with the doubtful Agatha Girton all but on the detective's doorstep. In London, Miss Girton could have been temporarily removed, since London is a large place and its policemen hold their tongues, but Carn had no faith in the reticence of Mr. Hopkins. Then, since Carn would have to stake his success on the skill of a mere handful of men, he wanted, if possible, to phone London and get those men specially sent down from the yard by racing car. He had the yardman's congenital contempt for the provincial constabulary. That would be running it very fine, but he figured that it could just be wangled if he got a clear line and found the assistant commissioner quickly, and if the said commissioner impressed it on the special squad that they would have to touch the ground in spots if they were going to be in at the kill, and if nothing went wrong with the police car. There were plenty of odds against him, but he reckoned that the importance of the occasion justified going to extremes, and if the worst came to the very worst, he could still call in the country bumpkins, and swear in the Saint and Orris, as he had the right to do, though it would gall his soul to have to make his arrest with their assistance. Anyhow, whichever way the calculation was made, it was going to be a breathless neck-and-neck affair, with every minute rated at inestimable value. And, having got every item in the programme weighed up and docketed in his brain, Carn wasted no time wailing and gnashing his teeth against the cussedness of a fate that had tossed him such a fine, big, juicy plum that day, for all the accompanying hail of thistles and cactus. Once he knew where all the thorns were, and had tested their precise degree of spikiness, he grabbed up his hat and stick and set out to blunt as many of them as possible. He went down to the village as quickly as he could, without seeming unduly flurried to any of the tiger's cubs who might catch a glimpse of him, and on the way through he stopped at the inn. "I've just had a letter from an old patient of mine," he explained. "An Ilfracombe man. He's had a heart attack. I've been his doctor for years, and he wants me to attend him now. That's a beastly nuisance, but I feel bound to go. Can't you let me have the car?" It was a plausible lie, for a boy cycled over from Ilfracombe with the post every morning, and did not arrive until lunchtime. "I'm sorry, sir," replied the publican, and Carn's heart did a back somersault and flopped sickeningly against his diaphragm. "Two of the men from Sir John's came down and hired the car early this morning to go into Ilfracombe for their day off." "Damn the gentleman," said Carn, but he said it to himself, and he did not call them gentlemen. Aloud, he said with only a moderate display of annoyance, "I ought to try and get over somehow, My patient's in a bad way, and they're expecting me. I suppose these fellows won't be back till late?" "They didn't say, sir, but I'm not expecting them until the evening." "Hasn't Horrocks got a trap?" Horrocks was the nearest farmer, about half a mile out of the village, and the innkeeper opined that Horrocks had something of the sort. "I wonder if you could send a boy over to find out if he'd lend it to me?" suggested Carn. The innkeeper cogitated at length, in the leisured manner of country people, while Carn masked his impatience as best he could. At last, the man decided that it would be possible. "Perhaps you'll join me in a glass of beer, sir?" he invited, after making this momentous resolution. "If I could see the boy now, he could be getting on his way while we down the quick one," Carn mooted gently. The publican sighed. The fidgetiness of city-bred people offended his placid spirit. Nevertheless, he shouted, "Boy!" and after a decent interval, during which he embarked on a voluminous discussion of the weather and its influence on fish, a diminutive urchin answered his summons. The urchin was instructed in the vernacular, but Carn was moved to add an exhortation in another language. "Tell him it's urgent," he said, slipping a half-crown into the infant's paw. "And hurry yourself. You can ride over in the trap, and I'll stand you another one of these if you're back quickly." The boy nodded and disappeared at the double. The innkeeper was working the beer engine, and Carn, outwardly impassive, gnawed mouthfuls out of the stem of his pipe in the effort of appearing calm. The absence of the Ford, however antique and rickety, was a disaster. It meant that unless he was remarkably lucky, he would have to be content with the assistance of a mob of mutton-headed locals for the big job. They would be panting with excitement at the magnitude of it, twice as jumpy as so many cats on hot bricks, and good-naturedly, clodhopperily dense. The prospect of seeing the tiger get away through their bungling almost broke Carn's heart. He would have taken a chance and tackled the whole brigade of tiger cubs single-handed if he had seen the faintest hope of success. But he had been turned out of a different mould from Simon Templar's. And his kind of brain did not run to schemes for capturing a boatload of bandits all by himself. As it was, he had more than half a mind to enlist the saint. Templar was straight, he knew, and it would be better to pinch the tiger with the saint's help than see the tiger get clean away. That, however, would have to be resolved on the spur of the moment, for there was still a chance, the rapidly fading ghost of a chance, but a chance all the same, that final humiliation would not be thrust upon him. Carn gulped down his beer, thankful that the innkeeper was perfectly happy to conduct a monologue. "Have another?" "I don't mind if I do, thank you, sir." The detective cursed and fumed inwardly, but it had to be borne. If he had rushed out without standing his whack, every subsequent customer would hear the innkeeper's comments on the doctor's extraordinary behaviour. And that would get to the tiger's ears, and the tiger, as Simon Templar had observed, owned a nasty, suspicious mind. But the ordeal ended at last, and Carn was able to excuse himself. He went through the village, and set out up the hill to the pill-box. It was a sultry day, and Carn had accumulated a lot of spare avoirdupois since his London to Southern days. He climbed doggedly, with the perspiration streaming down into his collar, and gasped his relief when the slope commenced to flatten out. He was still a dozen yards from the pill-box when Orris appeared at the door. Orris made it elaborately obvious that he had simply come out for a breather. He surveyed the scenery with the concentrated interest of an artist, and honoured the detective with nothing but a nonchalant glance, but he kept his right hand behind his back. "Master Templar in?" demanded Carn from a distance. "Ain't," replied Orris laconically. "Do you know where he is?" Orris focused the detective with unfriendly eyes. "Dunno. Gone for a walk, most likely. He might be chasing hippopotamuses across the Eppy Forest," enlarged Orris, become humorous. "Or he might be hopping up and down the Home Secretary's chimney looking for Santa Claus. Or he mightn't. Who knows, as the actress said to the bishop." "Now, look here, little titch," rasped Carn, with pardonable heat. "I haven't sweated up this blasted mountain in a temperature like hell warmed up just to hear a lot of funny back chat from you. The tiger's going to push you over the cliff tonight, but you don't matter much, as Mr. Templar I came to warn." Oris looked meditatively at the detective. "Oh," he remarked. "Oh, well, in that case." His right hand came out of cover, revealing the blunderbuss which Carn had seen before. It leveled on the detective's waistcoat, and Carn needed all his experienced agility to knock it up and wrench it out of Oris's hand before any damage could be done. Then he chucked it round the corner of the pillbox. "Don't be such a blazing lunatic!" he snapped. "As far as I can see, the only use for that lump of ivory above your ears is that it makes a place to hang your hat on. Don't you see that I'm trying to save your worthless skin? I tell you, the tiger's laying for both you this evening. Got it? Tiger. 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 You know who he is, don't you? Well, look out, that's all. He's aiming to have the pair of you ready for the morgue by morning. And if you wake up and find yourselves dead after this, nobody can blame me." "Nobody's going to worry about you, cocky," Oris assured him. "Thanking you kindly for the tip, and will you go back to the tiger and tell him Mr. Templar and me are laying for him tonight, and so if he wants to pick up a packet of trouble, this is our home address." "Well, you go off and find your boss, Oris, and pass the tip along to him," said Carn shortly, and turning his back on the man, lumbered off down the hill again. He found the trap waiting for him outside the inn, with a farmhand on the box and an expectant urchin in tow. Largesse was forthcoming, and then Carn clambered up beside the driver. "Elfricombe," he ordered, "and make all the speed you can. I'm on an urgent case." They rattled away, and Carn fished out his pipe and fumbled for matches. There they were, on their way, and fretting wouldn't put an inch an hour on the pace. Everything depended on the stamina of the animal between the shafts. He looked at his watch. It was 3:15. Still, he thought that if the horse was willing, and they were afflicted with no such act of God as a cast shoe or a wheel going adrift, there might yet be a glimmer of hope. For the tiger's ship, then riding over the rim of the horizon, and with orders not to start coming in until nightfall, would take some time to reach the old house. The loading of the gold would be an all-night job, but he knew that the tiger intended to prefer his own safety to the safety of his ill-gotten gains, and the arrest of the tiger was the accomplishment which Carn most desired to add to his record. The next minute, Carn remembered that he had omitted to warn Patricia home. He swore inaudibly at that for a while, but presently he was able to console himself with the thought that if the tiger was rightly informed, and Simon and she had fixed it up, the saint would not be far away. And probably the saint had as good an idea of the girl's danger as anyone. That, at any rate, was the only optimistic way to look at it. They were just topping the hill which in a moment would shut out the village from their sight, when Carn heard the shots. There were two reports, so close together that their echoes merged into one rattle. Instinctively, the detective made a mental note of the exact time. Then he looked at the man beside him. That worthy, however, was quite unperturbed, but he read Carn's astonishment at this display of sang-froid. "We am used to it, sir," he explained. "That be Master Lomas Cooper. He do sometimes be out zootin' rabbits." "I see," said Carn, and made no further comment. But the detective knew a lot about firearms. The distance and the echoes prevented an exact diagnosis, but as far as he could judge, the gun had been fired somewhere among the houses on the West Tor. And it sounded to him like much heavier artillery than is employed for shooting rabbits. Okay, this won't be a spoiler, because I did my best to kind of obfuscate, however you say that, the actual character, who the reveal of who the tiger is. That's still definitely a secret, and I don't think my vocalization gave it away, but I had to do a bunch of research to figure out who the tiger is, so I knew how to do, what to do for a voice there. So I still don't think I gave it anything away, and hopefully you guys are still left guessing, because it is always fun to have that mystery. Let's see, we had a few words here today. This one is a really good one. Avoirdupois. I had never heard that one before. Is weight or heaviness, especially of a person. So, yeah, avoirdupois. So he had some extra avoirdupois. It just means weight or heaviness. That's a really good one. This box has a lot of avoirdupois. And then wangled. If you thought that I was talking like a cartoon character trying to say the word wrangled, you would be wrong, because it's actually wangled, which means to succeed in getting or doing something by persuading someone or by being clever in some way. So you have to wangle your way around to get something done. That's what you end up with, which, yeah, again, I've never heard that before. So I guess basically social engineering is technically wangling. So you can kind of throw that into a conversation if you can find a way. The other thing is I wasn't familiar. I knew how to pronounce it, but I was not familiar with. It mentioned a Klieg arc, which I had to look that up. A Klieg arc is basically a special type of lamp that they used in filming back in the day. So stage lighting, it's basically an arc lamp, extremely very bright carbon arc lamp used primarily in filmmaking and stage lighting. So it was named for its inventors, John and Anton Klieg, and is known for its ability to illuminate scenes that were daytime, even at night. So I guess they probably used those in like old-fashioned movies and theater productions and stuff like that. And so, yeah, saying that Simon Templar likes to be in the Klieg arc, Klieg light. It's another good one. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the little etymology section here, and that you're enjoying this book. If you are, again, I'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch. And if you do want to sign up to be a patron, you get these episodes early. So make sure to check that out. It is such a good way to support the podcast and allows me to continue to bring you high-quality audiobook work like this. If you like this, if you think it's worthwhile, please share it. Tell somebody that you know about the podcast. That is the best way to ensure that we stay on the digital air. So thanks, guys, for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return,
But I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though.
I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.